You are listening to episode number 30. In this episode, we are going to develop our own inner leader through working with our inside and outside voice, with our breath, with our presence. I've got an amazing guest today. You're not going to want to miss this one. Stay tuned. So, the big question is, how do ambitious people like us, who grew up listening to the old advice of go to school, work hard for 40 years, and retire when you're old, create a life today that is meaningful, abundant, healthy, and brings joy, while also leading a life that is productive and full of achievement? That is the question, and this is the podcast that will help give you the answers that you're searching for. My name is Del Denny, and welcome to the Upgrade Your Life podcast. Welcome to the Upgrade Your Life podcast. I have a special guest today, Jennifer Lang. Jennifer Lang is an intuitive voice and communications coach based in Victoria, BC, Canada. Jen intuitively guides her clients to speak from a place of connected confidence so they can lead the change they want to see in the world. After training and working as an opera singer and a singing teacher, Jen and her husband moved to Abu Dhabi and Dubai for 5 years. Along the way, Jen trained as a Reiki master and started to cultivate her intuitive gifts while working with clients on speaking, leadership, presence, and confidence. Jen believes that we are all called to leadership in some form, and cultivating inner leadership that is connected to strong core values is a defining aspect of personal development. Jen, there is a lot to cover today. Thank you for coming on the Upgrade Your Life podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Del. It's really, really awesome to be here with you.
Thank you very much. Now, you work a lot with leaders and you have a very interesting background, but give us a little more background. Being in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, opera singer, give us some little context of how you got to this point.
Yes. Okay. Lots to cover. However, I'll be succinct. Basically, I trained living in Montreal. I trained at McGill University as an opera singer. I always knew I wanted to work with voice and singing. I've always been musical. However, I didn't really get into the opera singing itself until I actually fell and broke my foot, and I couldn't do karate. So it's just this really funny life pushed me into singing. And so once I finished my studies at McGill University, I moved back to Victoria and I started teaching. I also took a job at the university in marketing and communications, working with internet strategies and communications. So I really developed the whole communications piece in terms of both the outward organizing business end of communications and the internal using your voice, connecting it to your body, connecting it to your intentions piece of things with the teaching of singing. And it got to the point where I could hear in my singing students, and I taught mostly adults. I love teaching adults. I mean, even young adults, great. Yes, I love teaching kids. However, there was so much more rich conversation and rich excavation to happen working with adults' voices. And particularly what I found was that adults carry these old messages that they've heard and integrated from childhood into their adulthood. And that was impeding their ability to communicate effectively, to show up as the leader that they could be potentially, and to develop their voice for speaking and singing skills. How this got me to Dubai and Abu Dhabi is actually through my husband, who is an e-learning professional. He got hired by Etihad Airways and we moved to Abu Dhabi, and I started to develop my business working with professionals in the region who wanted to improve, first of all, their English speaking presentation skills, because there is a huge expat population there. Mm-hmm. But some of the executives that I worked with were from other countries and from countries where English wasn't their first language. So mostly through word of mouth and referrals. And that's how I really started to get into working with the leaders, some of the leaders there, people who've been involved, made heads of departments, but without the traditional HR training that one might have experienced in North America.
Mm-hmm. I love it. When you're working with leaders, and before we get into the leadership concept, some people think they're leaders. Some people think you have to be born to be a leader. There's all these different ideas of what leadership is. Can you tell us, in your idea, what does leadership mean to you?
Oh, yeah. So leadership is really, first of all, starts inside yourself. And you have to see yourself as a leader first and believe you can be a leader in order to effectively lead the actions that need to take place for you to step more fully into that role. So, for someone, for example, one of my clients I worked with in Dubai, she was an Emirati, highly educated, extremely competent, was placed as a head of an acting manager of a business division of a large corporation. And, you know, yes, could do the work, but the way she walked into a room, the way she communicated with her team or led team meetings was not congruent with the role that she was given. So she knew she could lead intellectually, but she didn't believe it in her body or her energy. And that was a big disconnect there that we tried to bring together.
I like that. So when we've talked a little bit earlier about developing ourselves as leaders, and I agree, we're all leaders in some capacity. Well, we all have influence, whether it's a small group or a large group. Where do we start as a leader if we want to improve ourselves? You talked about the inside and outside voices, your breath, your presence. So where do we begin with all this?
Right. So I mentioned before, like that inside voice or the inside leader. Our inside voice shows up in many forms. Some people call it our inner critic. There's also our inner mentor, and it's that old tradition of the voice or the wolf that you feed is the one that becomes the strongest. So if you're constantly feeding that inner critic, that's the voice that's going to be the loudest. And if you're constantly feeding and listening to the inner mentor, that's going to become the strongest. And it's a practice. So start befriending and cultivating your inner mentor to begin that inside leadership journey. Tara Moore refers to this in her book, Playing Big, which is an excellent read. So that inner mentor piece you have to start with. On the external side, you can supplement and support that internal development with physical tips and tricks like standing tall, standing with our shoulders broad. Amy Cuddy has a great TED Talk. She has a couple of TED Talks, but she has a really good one about the way that physical posture reinforces confidence.
Mm-hmm.
So standing in the Wonder Woman pose, or standing with your arms sort of straight ahead of you on the table, standing up, leaning over, that cultivates those feelings and reinforces the inner mental work that you would be doing inside.
I've used that a lot as well with public speaking. I know as I had a big crowd of people, it's easy to kind of shrink, and your shoulders get tight a little bit. And that was some advice that I received too: is that Wonder Woman pose where you stretch out, put the hands on your hips, and just kind of keep that pose for a second.
Yeah, it's super valuable, and singers have to do this as well. It's again, when it was first introduced to me, when singers sing these really long phrases and the breath has to support the sound, what we want to do is shrink and collapse and kind of force the breath out, right? And this happens at the ends of sentences.
Mm-hmm.
But we actually have to counteract that and expand, get taller and wider and broader so that we have the space to finish that breath. And it's exactly the same thing when you're speaking or cultivating that inner leadership. You have to expand into the leadership piece.
Okay, so breathwork is something that really fascinates me. This is a concept that I haven't really dived down too much. It's been this little curiosity piece because I know when I've been stressed, I've realized I have shortness of breath. I've noticed when I'm speaking in front of a large group of people, I have to pace my breath as well. I don't want to sound winded. And so I know this is something I need to work on. So I don't think a lot of people think about their breath work. So can you tell us, like, why is this important, and how do we tackle this?
Oh yeah, it's a great question. So why is breath work important? Well, the first answer is, and it's the most obvious one, if you don't breathe, you're dead. That's the really first one.
That is a fact. That's for sure.
And the same thing goes when we are in front of an audience or doing something new that's pushing our boundaries for the first time. that actual breath response is part of the fight or flight or freeze hardwiring that we have developed over lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes and thousands of years. So to counteract that, it's becoming okay with taking a nice, slow, low breath in the body and allowing those pauses, like I just demonstrated, where your audience still wants that time to catch up. And that gives you the time to breathe and connect deeply with the breath low in the body. So I'm not, and if you think about it, the higher we breathe in the body, the more we are activating that fight or flight response. So it goes into the hyperventilation thing. But the more we cultivate that lower body breath, the more connected we are to the ground, the more connected we are to our body, to our core message, and ultimately to our foundation, which, if you have shaky foundations, start there. So bringing in this breath work, it's a practice on your own before you're put into these situations that might cause a nervous reaction like shortness of breath. But at the same time, you have to practice those situations in order to get better at them, better at managing them.
I like that. So how do, from a singing standpoint to a business standpoint, how does that correlate with each other?
Are you talking about specifically about the breath work part?
Yeah, about breath work. How that those techniques that you've learned as a singer and opera singer, how can we apply that to business or everyday life?
So for everyday life, no one in everyday life is going to be taking a quote unquote operatic breath for singing. So let's just keep that straight. Unless you're the office singer,
Yeah.
I have been in the past. Everyone's like, Jen, will you sing happy birthday? Yes, I'll sing happy birthday.
Nice.
But not operatically, because that sounds cheesy. So with the breathwork piece, honestly, you don't have to be a trained singer to get in contact with a healthier or a more aligned breath for yourself. So many tutorials online, yoga teaching, yoga breath. Pilates breathing is a little bit different. I would be more inclined to go for the yoga breath practices. And there's oodles of tutorials, just yoga breathing. And one of the easiest things you can do actually is lay on the floor with your hand on your stomach and practice seeing your belly rise and fall and your hand rise and fall with your inhalation and exhalation. And that is a body sort of core connected breath that you can then take into the next board meeting or the next staff meeting that you have to lead or the next podcast interview, because some people get nervous being interviewed. So instead of, allowing that breath to get really high, simply placing a hand gently on your lower belly and remember, breathe into that lower hand. All of a sudden, your pacing slows down, your breath slows down, and consequently, your heart rate also slows down.
I really like that. I know the breath is something I've really worked on the last few years, really, with meditation, working on my breath. That's calmed me down a little bit. And so I couldn't agree more. What are some other areas as we're developing an inner leader? Leadership starts with us first. What's some other areas that you coach your clients with to become better leaders?
Yeah, great question. So one of the areas that I specialize in terms of leadership is intuitive leadership. So that really cultivates, and now, yes, it's becoming less of I would say it's becoming more of a common word these days. And, I use oracle cards. Not everybody does. That's fine. Others use tarot cards. It's not the only path to intuitive leadership. Intuitive leadership is learning to recognize the signals in your own body and being. It could be your mind. It could be like that gut feeling that one has often. Those are intuitive hits that you as a leader have to start to learn to trust. So that is a very unique way that I approach leadership, because I teach and guide my clients how to cultivate those intuitive skills to step into those leadership roles more strongly.
how do we develop intuition? Like you said, it's kind of that gut feeling, and
Yeah.
how do we cultivate that?
Oh, it's a great question. Oh my gosh. So there's many, many, many answers to this question. And the easiest way I think I would start would be to start to notice when you have that niggle or when you have that feeling, the gut feeling about something,
Hmm.
and notice how that feeling comes to you. So maybe it's a gut feeling, literally. Maybe it could be like those the butterflies in the stomach, or maybe it's that really firm. You have that firm answer. You're like, oh yeah, this feels really good. That would feel really good instead of your lower abdomen, your lower torso. That would be a strong yes. Then maybe you get goosebumps. So that's one of the ways that I get signals when I'm talking to somebody and I know that we're both coming to a conclusion that's going to be a big fat truth bomb. I
Mm.
get huge goosebumps through my whole body. Another way that people experience intuition is they might have a word suddenly pop into their head. And that's called a form of clairaudience, or clair being open to the sort of auditory signals, even though you may not physically hear it with your ears. So it might just be like, oh, I need to do this. Well, how do you know that? Well, I just know. Then you're getting into that knowing stage. So, first of all, noticing how those messages come to you, then making a note of what's a strong yes, what's a strong no, or what's a I need to wait because the answer isn't clear yet.
Mm. I love that. Now, your background is also a Reiki master. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it makes. I was listening to a podcast recently. I was talking about chakras, and I'm very new to this, but I was listening. It was talking about a chakra that's towards the top of your head, I believe. And
Yes.
when you, it was talking about when you have a hot shower, it releases that chakra or opens up the energy there, and that's where ideas come from. Um, and I found that to be true. Like my best ideas come in the shower, and
So true. Hey, that's a
I,
form of intuition.
yes, it's so. Is there other areas like that? I know it's to some people Reiki may be a little. I don't know. I believe in it. Other people may call it frou-frou, but I believe there's something to it. Is there other ways in that path that we can develop better intuition?
Yes. So obviously, Reiki is for those of your listeners who don't know, Reiki is a form of energy work that basically taps into what they call universal life force energy. And a Reiki master is taught how to sort of listen for it with our hands, and then use and develop our hand skills and those energy pieces to intuit and gather information for the person who is receiving the Reiki. So sometimes it's health related, sometimes it's stress related. I think I call it grown up nap time, because any of my clients who come just for a Reiki session, inevitably they fall asleep and they wake up feeling refreshed, and they're like, oh, what just happened? I'm like, oh, we shifted a few things, and our conscious bodies, our conscious selves hang on to so many things, and even our subconscious does. So the Reiki allows that to move. The Reiki gets in there and allows your subconscious to move the stuff out, so you feel
Mm.
lighter.
That's all.
Interesting.
Well, as a side note, I scheduled my first Reiki session 2 weeks from now. So in the next couple weeks, I have my first Reiki session. I'm pretty excited
Oh,
for.
yeah, yeah. It's pretty awesome. It's if your mind is really busy, it can be hard to relax. And I think one of my clients in Abu Dhabi, it took her 3 or 4 sessions before she really fell into a space of relaxation to enjoy, like fully enjoy the experience and fall asleep. But
Beautiful.
if you're looking for some nap time, it's great. And so the Reiki works with the chakras, which are the energy centers in the body. That's traditionally, and the chakras are related to a sort of an Indian Vedic system of energy work.
Got it.
And the Reiki is a Japanese thing, but it's honestly, it's all energy.
It really is, and I know as a leader, just kind of getting back to our topic. The reason why I want to bring
Mhm.
that up is because just like we talked about earlier, I know as a leader, it starts with me first. It starts with what I'm feeding myself, the energy I'm projecting, and it all starts with what's between my ears and those the inner dialogue that goes on there. And so
Yeah.
going along with that, so increasing our intuition that helps us as a leader. Understanding those chakras can help us as a leader. Is what else can we do to help ourselves as a leader to transform into a better leader?
Oh, good question. You're touching on all these interesting areas. A lot of, honestly, find who inspires you. What leaders do you want to model? And then start to observe what in their leadership style really appeals to you. And then start to take that on for yourself or cultivate in that in yourself. So it might be that, we talked briefly before we started recording about Brene Brown, and
Hmm.
she just started a podcast. And I really love how she shows up so honestly. And she's just like, yep, I'm having a day. And this is just how I am. And this is how I talk about it. And I like her leadership style for that reason, because she's a real straight shooter, as they say. She's from Texas. What do you say?
I do like how authentic she is. She shows the good and the bad, and I appreciate that. I like it when people show that their life isn't perfect, that they have struggles too. And as we record this, we're recording it during the coronavirus, and a lot of people are quarantined and self distancing. And I
Mhm.
think you see a lot of true character coming out in people and individuals and corporations, it's great to see some authenticity today.
Yeah, and to speak to that, it's so funny because, of course, we've all seen those memes about, oh, I had no idea that the CEO wanted me about this company, wanted me to care about this. Like, we've all seen those CEO messages, and it's
Hmm.
they're stepping up as a leader, feeling the pull to again set people's minds at ease about aspects of the business, and this is a large collective change. So we all need to step up into that leadership role, both in our own lives and in the companies or businesses or workplaces in which we are operating.
Mm, most definitely.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, I want to ask you a question here, and I ask all of our guests. It's a standard question. It's an introspection question, and it goes like this: if you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself for reaching your full potential?
Lovely. I would tell her, you are amazing and you have no idea what incredible experiences are waiting for you.
Mm, I love that.
I know it's succinct, but it's that my 18-year-old self would have needed to hear that.
I love that. I I would give that same advice to myself. That's really
Yeah.
good. Well,
Thanks.
well, Jid, I love talking with you on our podcast. People are going to want to know more about you. Where can they find you on the internet?
Okay, so I have a fantastic website that is at jenlang.com. So that's JENLANG.com. Super easy. You can find me on my Facebook page. I post there from time to time. And that is facebook.com/I am Jen Lang, just like I spelled on my website. And I'm on Instagram. My Instagram that I'm most frequently on for the leadership parts, and it's honestly mostly pictures of my dogs right now, but that's okay. It's it's Instagram, and my handle is at Genius Langus. That's JENIUSLANGUS.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Upgrade Your Life podcast. This has been fun. It's been informative. And I know people are going to want to reach out to you. So I'll make sure I put all those links in the show notes to the podcast episode. So, Jen, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Del. And I just wanted to mention too that I have that special freebie for the listeners, and it's a series of posture, breath, and voice meditations. They're all 5 minutes each, so that each of you can start to develop your own inner leader through posture, breath, and voice.
Ooh, perfect. And we will put the link in the show notes for sure. I'm going to make sure I download that as well. All right.
Perfect.
Well,
Thanks.
Jen, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks a lot, Del.
Thank
Take care.
you. Bye-bye. Well, that's it, my friends. Thanks so much for being with us this week. Do you have some feedback that you'd like to share? Well, please leave a note in the comments section below. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes to get automatic episode updates of the Upgrade Your Life podcast. And finally, please take a minute to leave us an honest review and ratings on iTunes. They really help us out when it comes to the ranking of the show, and I make it a personal point to read every single one of those reviews that we get. So please leave a review. I appreciate it, and thanks for listening.